term 1 out of 9 is done. My third month, or 2.5 maybe. Yeah, I think I squeezed together term 1 and 2 into sort of 1.5 months. But yeah, it's been 2.5 months with the progress and the plan. And to finish this term, I dedicated a whole month to composition. So in this video, I'll share what I worked on and what's next. When it comes to composition, my previous art school experience, composition was mostly about rules. So the rule of thirds, the golden ratio. But that feels like a pretty narrow understanding of what composition really is. And it wasn't up until now really that I realized how much deeper it goes. And I feel like I've always leaned on my intuition, just going with what feels right. Intuition alone can only get you so far. So I think with more tools in my belt, I feel like my intuition can grow and become more refined. This month wasn't as much about making pretty pictures. It was more about analyzing and understanding picture making, and not about creating polished or finished drawings or paintings. It was a lot more about thinking and sort of breaking down composition in a way that I haven't before. The biggest focus was on learning all the different tools that we have to our disposal when composing an image. So the first step I took was the new Masters Academy course called Composition for the Visual Artist with Bill Perkins. It's broken down into 10 segments that covers sort of the core concept of composition. And what I felt was particularly good with Bill's approach is that he wasn't so focused on making a pretty picture. It was a lot more about learning the tools and how we can use the different tools to manipulate the viewer, and both in subtle and direct ways, and where to focus the viewer's attention and maybe even evoke some kind of emotion. He also emphasizes the use of hierarchy in your composition and sort of why a certain area might dominate another one depending on your choices. This felt like a pretty important concept that I haven't really thought about before that much. Like, depending on the choices we make when making an image, that will affect the viewer obviously, but we can manipulate the viewer and we can draw the viewer's attention in a lot of different ways. So we can use color a certain way, or we can use shapes in a certain way, or even texture, things like that. In addition, he talks about the primaries of design, which are line, mass, and form. So mass being light versus dark, and form being sort of shadow versus light. And mostly like how we can use these to draw the attention of the viewer by, for example, adding more form to a certain area than another one. And he also talks about what he calls methods of measure, which is sort of how we can balance our image. The major key and the minor key, and the major key being proportion. So is there a lot of texture in the image? Is it mostly mass dominant instead of form dominant? And yeah, things like that. So it's good to have an idea, or when making the image, sort of where it's going, and play into that. And then it talks about the minor key, which is the contrast. So how contrasty is your image? Is it like full contrast? So it goes from pitch black to the whitest white, or is it a light image, so the value scale is higher, or is it lower? Yeah, depending on what types of emotion you want to bring out in the viewer. Now, for the books that I've read this month, I read 2 books, and they were so good. Like, they were so good. And I think this has helped my understanding of composition more than anything else I've read or listened to before. The first book is Picture This: How Pictures Work by Molly Bang. She starts the book off with posing a question. How does the structure of a picture or any visual art form affect our emotional response? And this is exactly then what she's trying to and I would say successfully, answers in the book. I think even if you have an understanding of composition, I think this book will still give you a lot of insights into why certain compositions might make you feel a certain way, and not just a formula for how to compose an image. The whole book and its images are all very simplified, and the pictures are made with cutout paper in 3 different colors. Then she does something very smart, I think, which is she's taking a story which I think most of us have heard before, which is the Red Riding Hood. And already just saying that, we get ideas and a context of the images that are going to show up. And I think she uses that in a very smart way, showing how different compositions and decisions sort of live up to that expectation or not. Like you have a big, scary, big bad wolf. So how do you emphasize that in the composition? And then she shows a bunch of examples of how to do it, or like why something works better than other things. Later in the book, she also goes through other examples. What happens to a red object depending on if the background is dark or like black or white. And her using such simple examples with basic shapes and limited colors just makes it super clear. And it really drills down into the sort of core of the image without distracting you with a bunch of bells and whistles. And I honestly don't have anything bad to say about the book, because it's so easy to take in, but with a lot of powerful examples. If you want to learn more about composition, I would strongly suggest you buy this book and go through it. Then we have this book, which is Graphic LA by Robh Ruppel. And at first glance, this might look like a coffee table book or something that you keep in your living room to impress your friends. Like, look at me, I'm an artist. I read art books. But do not be fooled. This is an absolute gem of a book. And the book is not a guide, but rather a gateway into Rob's mind. It's almost written like a self-help book for artists. It leaves you with ideas and concepts to ponder on, more than saying like, this is how you do it. And it's mostly focused on environments and landscapes, even though I think the concepts and the ideas are applicable on anything, any kind of imagery that you're making. And I think just as he's sort of showing you ways to simplify shapes and compositions, the whole book is simplified to its core and the concepts like most important essence. And he just drops these absolute bombs of clear concepts to think about. And I have a strong feeling that I will read some of the quotes in the book, and in like 2 years' time, something will just click, and I'll have this like eureka moment where I'm like, oh, that's what he meant. Or of course, like that is so obvious now. And so I think this is one of those books you pick up every now and then, and you flip through it. And I'm sure each time I will find something like that it's just exactly what I need to hear or think about at that particular moment. So buy it, read it, look at it, and keep it close. It's what I would say. So next, I studied 50 movie frames. I thought this would be a fun, straightforward exercise, but it turned out to be a lot more tedious than I thought it would be, and a lot more work than I expected. I wasn't just copying the images, even though it looks like that, but I was thinking a lot about each frame and sort of why it was composed the way it was, simplifying the shapes and seeing if that's where the magic happened, and often it was. And sometimes it was really clear, like why my eyes were looking at a certain thing in the image, and sometimes it was more sophisticated and subtle. And I also did this digitally in Photoshop. I wanted to experiment a bit with different brushes, but I also felt like that would be quicker to iterate on and sort of erase stuff and things like that. It did get quite repetitive by the end of it. It was a good way to get a close up of like how they use composition in movies. and to realize that a lot of thought goes into these scenes, like more than you probably think. And sometimes it's really obvious when you start analyzing a composition, like, whoa, okay, someone really thought about this. It's not just happenstance that he's standing there in a certain way, looking a certain direction, but it's actually someone who thought about it. But yeah, it was kind of boring but helpful. My biggest takeaway from this month is that composition isn't just about making things look good. It's about being intentional. From the very beginning, before I even start drawing, I need to ask myself, like, what is the purpose of the image and what do I want to achieve with this image? And from there, use all these different tools to design the image that communicates my intentions as clearly as possible. So it's not just about arranging shapes and colors. You need to guide the viewer's focus in the image where you want it to go, both in subtle ways, but also in direct ways. So up next, we're diving into anatomy, and specifically we're focusing on the head. And I'm really excited about this. This was one of those like parts of the plan that I looked forward to even from the beginning. And I'm planning to take on the 100 Heads challenge by the YouTuber Ahmed Aldori. That would be really exciting. And for this one, I'm going to only work traditionally. So it's going to be in a sketchbook. So that should be a lot of fun. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you in the next one.